Welcome to Turning the Tide. This is Candace, Salima, and I am coming at you from the heart of the Rocky Mountains. And today we have a great privilege to visit with Mr. John Weisman, who is an author and, well, okay, let's just say he does just about everything that is critical to what we're facing in America right now. He is a best-selling New York Times best-selling author. He is also very frequently seen on television and radio. And in fact, Mr. Weisman, my mother saw you on Fox News yesterday. Were you on?
Super.
Yeah. Oh, she loved you. She just thought you were awesome.
Well, thank you, Candace.
No problem. Okay, and then you are also an NRA certified pistol instructor who has created and run tactical exercises for, is that Loudoun? Is that how you say that?
It is Loudoun County, yeah.
Okay, and Fairfax counties in Virginia, and worked on the city of Manassas Park in Clark County in Virginia as an active shooter exercises. I mean, your credentials go on and on and on. So let's just say it suffices that you are more than qualified to have written the book Kill Bin Laden, a novel based on true events. Now, sir, welcome to Turning the Tide. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
Thank you. Okay, I read your book in one sitting, believe it or not. I picked it up, opened it, and I did not go to bed till like 1:30 in the morning. I could not put it down. I was so fascinated with how you pulled it together because according to Publishers Weekly, they said Kill Bin Laden is impressively detailed and imagined. Weisman's fictional account of the hunt for al-Qaeda leader Usama bin Laden will resonate with armchair patriots. Weisman knows the ins and outs of covert operations and high-tech weaponry, all of which come to bear in this fast-paced narrative focused on the last stages of the search for the world's most wanted man. I have been very curious as to how this hunt went for him. I mean, obviously, we in America know we've been at it for 10 years. And I was very disheartened when all of it went down that our president, our vice president, and some others were all vying for the right to crow that we had taken out Osama bin Laden, but they revealed information that I thought should never have been revealed. So why don't we start off with you explaining about the book, why you decided to write it, and why you went fiction instead of nonfiction, because you're a bestseller of both types.
Well, Candace, about 3 days after the Abbotabad operation, I got a call from HarperCollins, and the editor who called said, look, you've been writing about special operations and intelligence and SEALs for 20 years. You're well connected in the community. You're well respected in the community. Could you do a nonfiction book for us on this operation? And I said, well, I don't know. I'll get back to you on it if you give me a day or so to talk to some people. And I got back to them, I guess, about 3 or 4 days later. And I had talked to people, and I called them, and what I told them, I still believe. What I told HarperCollins, I still believe. And that was, I said that anyone who tells you he's going to write a nonfiction book about this operation this year is probably lying, because nobody who knows anything about it is talking. People at the CIA are not talking. People in the special operations community are not talking. People at Naval Special Warfare Development Group, otherwise known as DevGru, or more popularly SEAL Team 6, are not talking. Not only are they not talking, but they cannot talk because they've signed papers, because they take polygraph tests every year. And if you are caught, if you're a SEAL and you are caught leaking anything to reporters, you lose your job. You lose your clearance. And so it was apparent to me that the only way I could do justice to the story was to create a parallel universe in which I reported for the book as if I were doing nonfiction. In other words, you go out, you do interviews, you research, you scour the internet, you come up with open source intelligence, you go back and kind of peel the onion, if you will. And then you create the characters into which these truths are inserted, these true facts are inserted. But the difference is this. If I were writing nonfiction, I would have to have reporting notes. I would have to have sourcing notes at the end of the book. I would have to have footnotes because here again, anyone who says, oh, you've got to take my word for it, is probably making stuff up a lot of the time, because if they don't want you to check to see what citations they have, what informants they have, what sources they have, it's just about fiction in my estimation. So by creating an alternative universe, I didn't have to worry about providing source notes. I didn't have to worry about footnotes. I could tell the story as I imagined it unfolded, but without any nonfiction strictures or journalistic strictures. So, Candace, that basically is how the book came about.
Well, and it's interesting to me because the book reads nonfiction, even though I know it's a novel. I understand that. It reads nonfiction, and you flat out used some of the names that are in the Obama White House, and others you gave different names and so on and so forth. And it was fascinating to me. The thing that I am quite intrigued by is by everyone that I asked and everywhere I checked, they said that you were spot on with this novel, that even though you had fictionalized it, your experience, your knowledge, your sources enabled you to get as close as possible to the truth of how Osama bin Laden was taken down as anyone out there. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, you did, and what I was able to do was run chunks of the book by Tier 1 operators. So
explain Tier 1, would you please, because my listeners probably don't know what a Tier 1 operator is.
Absolutely. Tier 1 would be SEALs, Delta Force, certain elements of the Airborne Rangers, forward air controllers, and the intelligence people that go along with them would be Tier 1 units. And it's our Tier 1 units who in Afghanistan perform what is known as HVT, or high value target capture kill missions. As a matter of fact, Tier 1 units performed in 2010 alone 1,700 of those HVT capture kill missions.
Which is awesome, and I'm glad that generally speaking, we don't know that. And why I mean that is because there seem to be a lot of loose lips out there, and they don't seem to understand that if they are talking about these missions, that men's and women's lives are at stake. I mean, people die if people talk. That's why they're not supposed to.
Well, this is true, and as a matter of fact, there is very little there's been a fair amount written about them, but most of the players stay way under the radar, and that's the way it should be. But these missions are all done basically off the same template, which is, you go in at night, which means that your targets are hopefully asleep. You use a trinity of speed and surprise and violence of action to achieve relative superiority very, very quickly, knocking down any defenses, killing with high explosive if you have to. Generally, there are not very many shots fired on these HVT missions, simply because surprise is so overwhelming and it's done so quickly that the targets have very little chance to defend themselves.
And that's the whole point of what they do, is to, regardless of how people look at it and whether there's the, oh my, I can't believe they did that nonsense out there. that's the job. That's what they're sent to do. And they're not sent to go capture. They're not sent to go and sit down and have tea with the people. Their job is to go and take them out. And we are safe because they do that.
Well, yes, that is the case. And one of the other elements that I wanted to make sure I included in KBL, Kill Bin Laden, is not only are these Tier 1 operators working with a very, very, very quick-paced operational tempo, but the people who are working alongside them, gathering intelligence, analyzing it, connecting the dots, if you will, they are also working this increased op tempo. You can't do 1,700 missions without 1,700 different intelligence missions going along with those, you know. And there's a huge amount of information that comes in, very much the way people who are fighting drug dealers will try and work their way up the chain from the street dealer to the kingpin. The same thing works in counterterrorism, and it's certainly in disrupting Al Qaeda's networks and the Haqqani network and various other terrorist organizations that are active in Afghanistan and then cross the border to Pakistan to take refuge.
Well, and I just did the math. That's 4.5 missions a day equaled out to by our Tier 1 operators. And so, in my opinion, we're going to get down to the book now, but in my opinion, I just want to say I count them heroes. I'm grateful for them, and I'm grateful that they go out and do that hard job so that we don't have to. It's just every day I express gratitude. I'm a religious woman, and so I pray, and I express gratitude every day for the men and women out there fighting this battle for us. And so I loved your book, Mr. Weisman. It really explained how these men and women can go out and do their jobs and come home and still have beautiful families and still be excited about the birth of a child and you know, the love they have for their wives and husbands and all these things that go on. It's just amazing. And I thought you portrayed that human element very, very well in the midst of a story that was fraught with suspense, with battles, with all kinds of consequences and everything going on. So you did a fabulous job with it, sir.
Well, I thank you, and I hope when your listeners go out and buy Bin Laden, Kill Bin Laden, KBL, you and they will put reviews up on Amazon and various other places so that we can get this a hugely wide audience, because I think the story is worth telling, you know.
It is, sir.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, one of the reasons I'm passionate about this book is that I wrote it in order to pay a tribute to the men and women who work without a net. You know, the protagonist in this book is a double amputee.
I was just going to bring him up. Charlie, I loved him.
Charlie Becker is representative of thousands of America's wounded warriors who do not want to be pitied. These are people who want to get back into the fight. Not 2 weeks ago, I was at a gathering in which I met a young Marine just back from Afghanistan where he'd lost a leg. He was less than 2.5 weeks back from losing that leg. And all he wanted to do was get used to his prosthesis so that he could get back into the fight, rejoin his unit, and do what he wanted to do for his whole life. That is normal. That is not the anomaly here, Candace. And
I know.
It was something that
it's humbling, isn't it?
When I met this young man, I mean, it is hugely inspirational, and it made me feel that I'd done absolutely the right thing in terms of KBL to use a double amputee as the main character.
And wow, he went through some stuff. But the thing that made it so amazing is it was so realistic in every aspect. He had to, Charlie Becker, he was the Ranger Master Sergeant in the book, who was embedded in Abbotabad, right outside the compound, the Usama bin Laden compound. Actually, it was called the Khan compound. Is that right?
That is correct. It was owned by two brothers, Arshad and Tariq Khan. Those names, of course, were pseudonyms, aliases.
Yes.
And there are any number of other names that they have been known by. But in Abbotabad, they were known as Tariq and Arshad Khan. And they and their families lived on the compound. The third family anywhere.
Yes. Well, okay. So I think people do not understand how much work goes into, specific. Let me just be very specific. They don't understand how much work went into finding, locating, and killing Osama bin Laden. You had your main character there for, what was it, 6 months?
Well, in point of fact, the CIA set up the safe house in Abbotabad in October of 2010, and it was manned between October of 2010 and May 1st, 2011. And there again, you talk about people working without a net. The SEALs who went in were heavily armed and very, very well trained, and they prepare for the worst and can fight their way out if they have to. But the folks who were manning that safe house were really working without a net, because if they were compromised, they were dead.
Yes, absolutely. People don't realize that once you leave the borders of the United States of America, and especially into a Middle Eastern country, it's a whole new game, and it is not a pretty one, and it never will be. And so the characters, in reality, there were CIA agents there, but in your book, the characters were on their own, and they had to watch their own backs. Now, as Charlie Becker, who is one of the main characters, is providing intel, which, days and weeks went by when nothing. He would see absolutely nothing, which is the reality of life in that type of a situation. All of a sudden, the ISI, is that what they were called? Yeah, the ISI, Pakistan. Are you still there, sir?
I am.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. The ISI, which is Pakistan's Inter-Service Intelligence Agency, had shown up there in Abbotabad, just doing a systematic search of the entire city. Now, tell us, in your book, you had a certain situation happen. Why don't you explain to what you wrote in the book and tell us if that is the reality of how things happened? Because I do remember the news from then.
You're talking about the character I call Ty Weaver?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, in the real world, what happened in Abbotabad and in Lahore happened slightly differently in the real world than in my novel. But in the real world, there was a CIA contractor named Raymond Allen Davis, and Mr. Davis worked out of the consulate in Lahore. And in February, I guess it was late January, early February, he shot and killed 2 Pakistani nationals who he said came to rob him.
I remember.
Tried to carjack him. And he was caught and he was thrown into jail by the Pakistanis. There was a huge diplomatic incident over this, which lasted for just about a month. And relations between the U.S. and Pakistan became very, very, very frayed. I used that incident fictionally in KBL, Kill Bin Laden, by making the incident a deception operation, a diversion operation by CIA to take attention away from Abbotabad. One of the things that had happened months before, just after the CIA set up its safe house in Abbotabad, was a CNN broadcast from Brussels, Belgium, that basically said Usama bin Laden is not living in North Waziristan or in a cave someplace. He's comfortable in a villa somewhere in Pakistan. And when Leon Panetta, who at that point was director of CIA, heard that story broadcast, I was informed by sources of mine that he went bonkers.
Well, who could blame him?
They had just set up the safe house.
Oh my goodness.
in my fictional parallel universe, the director of CIA, one Anthony Vincent Mercaldi, known as Vince, says we have to create a diversion. And so they do by sending Ty Weaver over and having him go very overt.
Which means he went very
aggressive.
Aggressive.
Exactly. He was very aggressive. And but in the real world, the fraying of the political situation between Pakistan and the United States actually did work to the CIA's favor, because they were much more careful about tracking our people in Lahore and Peshawar and Karachi and Islamabad. And since no American went toward Abbotabad, they pretty much left Abbotabad alone, which allowed that safe house to flourish. The problem, of course, was that the safe house never was able to prove conclusively that bin Laden was the third occupant of the compound.
Which in your book enters Spike, the analyst.
Yes, and that is based on a real character who was.
I was going to ask.
Yes, he's based on a senior analyst who had been working counterterrorism and especially bin Laden for some years. And this senior analyst was, in real life, brought to the White House by Director Panetta. And because the president and many elements in the White House were skeptical of the fact that bin Laden was at the compound, and
I
even
think
more.
You're very kind to say skeptical. Very kind. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, they were skeptical, and they were very much against a boots-on-the-ground operation, as, by the way, was Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. Secretary Gates had been at the CIA during the debacle in 1980, of April 1980, known as Desert One, where members of Delta Force and airmen were killed when a C-130 and a helicopter collided at Desert One in the Iranian desert before they could rescue the American hostages. And Secretary Gates had long ago said that nothing like that was ever going to happen on his watch. And so at first, he too was very skeptical about an operation for Abbotabad. The operation that they wanted to do was an air operation. But one of the things that the analysts at CIA were able to tell the President and the Secretary of Defense was that they could not say categorically that when the compound had been built, which was in 2005 or so, I think, that a bomb shelter, a bunker, had not been built under the compound. And
so that part was real?
Oh, yes. And
Ooh.
if that had been the case, you couldn't use very precise JDAM munitions, 500-pound bombs, and take the compound out, you'd have to use multiple bunker busters at 2,000 pounds each, and the radius of error compounds exponentially, and you end up killing a fair number of innocent civilians in that, and neither the president nor the Secretary of Defense would sign off on such a plan. So they were left with only one alternative, and that was boots on the ground.
Okay, this is what I wanted to ask you, sir. Are you willing to say, from what information you have gathered, who was willing to go boots on the ground in the White House and who wasn't?
Well,
I know Obama was very against it.
The president ultimately signed off on boots on the ground, so he was willing to go with it. The question was, would he allow the mission to proceed at all? And that he finally did give his word. As one of the characters in KBL says toward the end of the book, look, people are going to be talking about who did what and when. So far as I am concerned, this character says, all that counts is that he signed the paper. And certainly there were people at CIA and in the military who felt like that. Was the president an overwhelming supporter of this mission, as has been portrayed in some media? I personally do not believe so. My research has proved somewhat otherwise. It has indicated, proof is too strong a word. Let me say it is indicated somewhat otherwise. But in the end, he signed the lethal finding, which allowed CIA to use military assets to cross the border into a sovereign nation, fly 150, 160 miles, and kill the individual who was the most wanted terrorist on the face of the earth. So, you know, the end is justified by the long wait. Did the president or did the White House take a poll to see whether or not the mission should go forward? I believe personally that is exactly the sort of thing that this White House would do.
Well, it is, because that's what they do.
Can it, can it be proved? No. Maybe in 20 years, when we go to the Obama Presidential Library, I guess you'll build it in Hawaii.
Probably.
And FOIA the minutes of various national security meetings and memos sent between the president and his political advisors, we may come up with the answer as to whether he took a poll or not. At the moment, that is part of the fiction of my novel.
It is fiction, sir. I mean, as you wrote it, but everything that we have seen over the last 3 years makes it so very probable.
Well, as I said to HarperCollins as I was starting this project last June, there are some truths that can much better be told in fiction than nonfiction, especially when everything is classified and nobody's talking.
Yeah.
And that to me was the bottom line.
Well, you sure seem to nail the characters extremely well. Now, here's another question I had, and it was in the packet that your publicist sent me, but it was the question I had from the very beginning. There was so much misinformation as things were unfolding, and as you said, the incident in Belgium and everything going on. In your book, you have the director of the CIA, who is Vince, as you said, planting a little bit of disinformation. Did that really happen? Because it was really smart.
Well, I think when that report happened, which was in October, I believe it was October 18th of 2010, CNN reported from Belgium, a NATO source, told the reporter that bin Laden was not living in a cave, but living in a villa somewhere in northwest Pakistan. The CIA issued a series of denials that were printed over the next couple of days. I had my fictional character leak a story to Richard Holbrooke. Richard Holbrooke, of course, passed away shortly after that episode. So I could use his name properly in the novel. One of the things you'll notice in the novel is that the real people, in other words, the people who are real,
like Daly and Axelrod, and
exactly, and Admiral McRaven, and they never say anything in this novel, and the reason is because I would have had to supply real quotes from them.
Okay, you had Daly talking in the book. Were you able to get actual quotes from him? Because he was against us going in the book. He was against us going into Pakistan, into Abbotabad.
No, the character you're referring to is the counterterrorism advisor, whose character name was Dwayne Daly. You are mistaking him for the chief of staff.
Yes, sir, I am. You are right. Thank you.
But no, Dwayne Daly is a made-up character, as is the national security advisor in the book, and those are the only two people who have lines. And the president is never named.
I noticed.
And so he has lines, but the real people in the book, I mean, there is obviously no Mr. Panetta in the book, and if I had used Mr. Panetta's name, I would have had to use words that he had actually said in context, which is why I wrote fiction as opposed to nonfiction.
It was very wise of you. Sir, we need to take a quick break, and we'll be back on the other side with Mr. John Weisman, the author of Kill Bin Laden. That was released last week, November 15th, and it is an astounding book of fictionalized events leading up to the assassination of Kill Bin Laden. So, sir, we will return in about 2.5 minutes. Go ahead and take a quick break, okay?
Thank you very much, Candace.